So in this video, I want to talk about corruption and specifically corruption in Ukraine. And I promise you that if you give me a fair hearing, I will fundamentally change the way that you think about corruption in Ukraine. Now, you've heard that Ukraine is a corrupt country and they're so corrupt over there and oh, there's all these deals and okay, I got it. There is some truth to that, but listen, when you think about corruption, you have to think about relative to what. I'm going to make the argument that the more Eurocentric a country has been since the fall of the Soviet Union, the less corrupt they are, and the more Russia-centric that they are, the more corrupt that they tend to be. Now, just hear me out. Now, I saw this article today and I thought, wow, there's something really interesting about this particular article. Wanted thousands of Ukrainian judges in a huge overhaul sought by the EU. Now, Zelensky started out trying to root out corruption. In fact, he ran on rooting out corruption, and it's been a very hard slog, and he didn't get as much done as he was trying to do. But when he was elected, when he was giving his inauguration address, he said this, and you can look this up. Look in my book up here. Go read it. It's in there. He said, "Look, I don't want you to put my picture up in your offices." And he's talking to the legislators in the Rada. "Don't put my picture up on your wall. Instead, I want you to put a picture of your family on the wall. And then whenever you're making a decision, I want you to think, would they approve of what I'm doing right now?" Yeah, that's the way you should be thinking about it. Now, here, Zelensky has removed many people, military and other government officials, for corruption or even the appearance of corruption during the war. And they're doing something about it. Is corruption still a problem? Yes, but they're doing something about it, actively doing something about it. Okay, so here's this Reuters article. Wanted thousands of Ukrainian judges in a huge overhaul sought by the EU. Okay, Ukraine is desperately short of judges and kickstarting a long-delayed nationwide hiring spree to fill more than 2,000 vacancies. It's also central to cementing the rule of law, a condition for Ukraine to one day join the European Union. So in order to join the EU as a full-fledged member, they need to work this out. And they're working toward that. A poll released this month by a think tank in Kyiv suggested that 18% of Ukrainians trust the courts. That's a problem, and they got to get better. The European Commission, in a 2022 memo, said the judiciary continues to be regarded as one of the least trusted and credible institutions. It's so bad that if you look at Servant of the People, the TV series that Zelensky was in for 3 seasons from 2015 to 2018, if you watch that I think it's in season 2. I can't remember exactly where, but there's this court scene with a previous, not prime minister, but somebody that was corrupt, and they're trying to find somebody that can give a fair trial, and they go for episode after episode trying to find not corrupt judges. So that's been a thing, right? So, okay, and you can watch that. It's on Netflix. There is not a single court in Ukraine whose workload is normal. The war adds additional burden as 100,000 alleged Russian crimes are already being investigated. Wow, that looks like, I think my office is cluttered. Wow. Okay, some 2,000 sitting judges are also require integrity checks, part of the judicial house cleaning launched but never finished after the Maidan Revolution. A July survey by the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology found that 89%, nearly 9 in 10 Ukrainians, believe that corruption was the most serious problem facing their country apart from war. So they know that it's a problem. They want to root it out. They're working to root it out. They just were working on legislation that corruption during wartime would be considered treason in order to root it out. They're using what's going on right now, martial law, in order to try to gouge the corruption out of the body politic. But she said high-profile scandals, including a recent arrest of the former head of the Supreme Court taking a $2.7 million bribe, an accusation that he denies, tarnishes her profession and distracts from the daily work Ukrainian courts actually do. Okay, so is there a problem? Yes. Are they working to root it out? Yes. But my argument is going to be this. The corruption is not just a Ukrainian issue. In fact, Let's look at all the former Soviet republics. Here's former Soviet republics: Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, Ukraine, Estonia, Russia, Lithuania, Turkmenistan, Moldova. You get the idea. Okay, and let's look at Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index. Okay, and we're just going to work our way through this. And just as a baseline, the US has a rank of 24 out of 180. So we're just going to look at the ranks. Okay, so the score, the higher the score, the better, and the lower the rank, the better. So if you had a score of 1, you are awesome. Okay, that's where you want to be, and the lower the better. The US has 24, which isn't bad. It's not as good as it could be, but it's okay. Okay, now let's start looking at these. And so again, we're going to look at a country's rank, which is relative position to other countries in the index. Okay, Estonia. Now we're going to go back and we're going to look at all these former Soviet republics. Okay, Estonia. Estonia has a rank of 14. That's better than the US. Now, there's a reason why Estonia and then Lithuania at 33 and then Latvia, all the Baltic states, are so low on the scale compared to all the other Soviet states. And that's because they're more Eurocentric. They've been facing toward Europe. They've been wanting to get to Europe. They've been feeling, I've been under the thumb of the Soviets, and I was in Lithuania 3 times, and Lithuanians eventually read the Constitution and went, you know what? It says that we're free and independent republics of the Soviet system, and so we'd like to go now. And in 1990, 1991, they try to do that. And the Russians, the Soviets, but led by Russia, the Soviets sent tanks under Gorbachev, and then they blinked. And the people in Vilnius, the capital city, came out and locked arms around the parliament building. I talked to a member of parliament who said that they were unscrewing the banisters so that they'd have something to fight with when the soldiers broke through. But they fled the Soviet Union and became an independent state, and they never looked back, and they were going to Europe. That's where they wanted to be. Okay, so it was Estonia at 14. It was Lithuania at 33. It was Latvia at 39. Georgia at 41. Georgia, they were just today, I was reading about how in Georgia there was some hubbub because the president of Georgia, or prime minister, I don't remember which, was going to meet with European Union officials and trying to figure out how to get closer into the European Union. So that's Georgia at 56. Then Armenia, and then Belarus, which was surprisingly low to my mind. And then Kazakhstan at 101. And then you have Ukraine at 116. That's about the midpoint compared to the rest of the countries. What's after Ukraine? Who's more corrupt than Ukraine? Well, Uzbekistan at 126. Russia proper at 137. Russia is far more corrupt than Ukraine. Kyrgyzstan at 140. Tajikistan at 150. Azerbaijan at 157, Turkmenistan at 167, and that's where we are. Okay, so you saw that list. Now, I want you to understand something. The more eastern that you are facing, like Russia's orbit, except for Kazakhstan, all these other countries in Russia's orbit, the more that they're like that, the more corrupt they are. The more European, Westerns looking, like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, even Belarus was in that camp more. Like these, Moldova, they are looking to Europe and they're less corrupt. Now, I was thinking about that and I thought, well, that's interesting. I wonder how that works for the Warsaw Pact nations. So here is a list of Warsaw Pact nations. These were the, they're part of the Soviet sphere, but they're not Soviet Union proper, but they're kind of aligned with them under their thumb. And so these are countries like Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and then that was with the Soviet Union. So how did they fare? Well, they're going to be less corrupt on balance. Look at this. Germany, okay, kind of doesn't count because you only had East Germany. Germany is 9th in the world in the corruption index, but East Germany would have been far more corrupt, I'm sure. But we don't have a record of that. Czechia, that is the Czech Republic, and I double checked that. This is not Chechnya, this is the Czech Republic. 41, that's pretty low. What's next? Slovakia, 49, also pretty low. Bulgaria, 72. It's starting to get up there, but it's still not that bad. What about Hungary? 77. It takes till Albania before you get to 100. They're at 101. So when we think about this, it's an interesting exercise to think the more like, okay, these countries in the Baltic states, they really were rocking. They wanted to be part of Europe. And Belarus was at 90 something, Ukraine was at 116, but of all these countries, the highest was 101 because they're closer to Europe's orbit. And I think that's the way that it actually works. The more corrupt you, or the more you are tied to Russia, the more you're tied to the former Soviet kind of system. It's almost like a crazy cult leader. Like the Baltic states, like they're all in a cult. Let's use this as an analogy. They're all in a cult, and the Baltic states are like the guys that are leaving a cult, and they're like, you know what? Man, this was all a bunch of lies. I don't want to have anything to do with it. And maybe over here in some other states, they're like Georgia and Armenia and Belarus and Ukraine. They're like, I know. I mean, he's got some good ideas. I mean, whatever. And Uzbekistan's over here. Like, no, no, no. Seriously, guys. Like, he is the Messiah. He is the Messiah, right? It's kind of like that. But you'll notice that the more Russia-centric they are, the more corruption is going on, the more European centric. Now, I'm curious what you think about this, because I think that there's something to that. Let me leave you with one last thought. Putin was happy to have Yanukovych in 2014 fire on his own people in the Maidan Square. He never talked about that. He only talked about the coup, but he was fine with him firing on his own people in the Maidan Square as long as he signed agreements and became more cozy with Russia. Like wrap that around your mind. He's not upset about him killing his own people potentially. He is upset because he's disentangling himself from the Russian orbit, because he was trying to go to the European orbit. He backed out at the last minute and then came to Russia, and that's when the people rose up. And yeah, and that's the kind of thing that Putin's happy with, because Russia is more corrupt even than Ukraine. So I want, when you think about corruption, to think about it as relative to what? You've had about 30 years a little over 30 years, from 1991 to now. And the more European-centric you're looking, the less corrupt these countries have become. Okay, that's my thesis for today. Tell me what you think. I would love to hear it. You can put it in the comments below. If this is helpful to you, and you think it might help someone else, pass it along, share it with a friend who talks about how Ukraine is just so corrupt. Yeah, relative to what? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, the coffees, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.